morning once again to members of the media, to colleagues, and thank you for your patience. My name is Kalalelo Masidi and I'll be chairing today's session. I will introduce the panel. To my left is the Public Protector of South Africa, Advocate Kibina Bensela, and next to her is the Deputy Public Protector, Advocate Kevin Malunga. We'd like to apologize once more for starting the media briefing late, and I'd like you to please observe the following housekeeping rules. The Public Protector will, I'm going to introduce another member of the panel before the housekeeping rules. This is Advocate Mugebe Kanyani, Chief Investigator, Good Governance and Integrity. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the briefing, and as usual, when the Q&A session comes, you will introduce yourselves and tell us the media house that you represent, and the Public Protector as well as members of the panel will respond to your questions. Thank you. I'll hand over to the Public Protector.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Masibi. Once again, I also would wish to apologize for not keeping to the starting time. We thank all representatives of the media that are with us here today, and at the same time also thank complainants and interested parties that have come to join us this morning, and the Public Protector team that has assisted me in preparing these reports. A special greeting is extended to the Deputy Public Protector, Advocate Kevin Malunga, and specifically the team I've worked with in preparing these reports. Today we are releasing 3 investigation reports which are released in terms of Section 182, subsection 5 of the Public Protector Act. Section 182, subsection 5 of the Public Protector Act states the following, open quotes: any report issued by the Public Protector must be open to the public unless exceptional circumstances to be determined in terms of national legislation require that the report be kept confidential, close quotes. No such circumstances exist in relation to these reports. As you read this report, I invite you to bear in mind that they are all a culmination of investigations conducted in pursuit of Section 182 of the Constitution. Section 182 states the following, open quotes: the Public Protector has the power, as regulated by national legislation, to investigate any conduct in state affairs or in the public administration in any sphere of government that is alleged or suspected to be improper or to result in any impropriety or prejudice, to report on that conduct and to take appropriate legal action. I will be indicating, therefore, what the findings are and what I consider to be the appropriate remedial action. We had planned to release 4 reports today, but due to reasons beyond our control, I have decided to to withhold the release of one report, the report on Pilgrim's Rest. This report will be released on Monday, the coming week, through a press statement. We won't have a media briefing. The report deals with the propriety of tender processes at Pilgrim's Rest. The focus of the investigation was whether or not the people that were awarded tenders at Pilgrim's Rest qualified for those tenders. Another key allegation was the propriety of the tender processes. In other words, was the tender process executed in accordance with the law and regulations? As you look at that report on Monday, I would like you to look very carefully at what the legal framework says and how the process unfolded. One of the allegations was that the process was irregular. The second allegation was that some of the traders that were given contracts did not qualify. This is a case where, unusually, the tender was supposed to go to the highest bidder as opposed to the lowest bidder. That's the law. So when you review it on Monday, just have that in mind. Was the process in accordance with the law? Was the tender or the tenders awarded to the highest bidders as required by law? And then the last allegation was that the existing traders were not treated fairly insofar as their contracts were being ended. The process, the amount of time given to them to close shop was too short for them to be able to wrap up their businesses, and also the allegation was that the impact on employees was unfair. I also want to bring to your attention today that there is another report that we issued through the same process a few weeks ago. That report, which goes under the title Waste and Water, was issued on 24 October 2013. It dealt with allegations of maladministration that had led to a sewage spillage at Rot Mariko in the Northwest. I now turn my attention to the three reports we are releasing today. The first report, titled Learning Without Books, deals with alleged failures in the management of the distribution of workbooks in the Eastern Cape. I just want to underline there that we're not dealing with school books, which have been dealt with by the courts. The investigation was dealing with workbooks, which are equally important but different. The second report, titled Unsolicited Donation, deals with alleged maladministration in the sponsorship of the ICT Indaba by the Department of Communications and alleged ethical violations by the then Minister of Communications. The last report, titled Docked Vessels, deals with alleged irregularities in the award of a sea patrol and research tender by the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries with about 800 million rand. The allegations include alleged failure to manage the transfer of sea patrol operations from the outgoing company to the Navy. Also alleged was that the abrupt cancellation of the contract of the existing company was in retaliation for whistleblowing. As I was preparing these reports, particularly those that deal with alleged conduct failure, I started reflecting on the work of this office since its inception about 18 years ago. One case that came to mind is a case dealt by the first public protector of South Africa, Advocate Selby Barker. The case was dealt with in 1999, or rather the report was issued in 1999. The case involved allegations that the then Premier of Mpumalanga, the Honorable Ndaweni Mahlangu, had violated the Executive Ethics Code in that he had indicated that he thought it was okay for politicians to lie. The Honorable Ndaweni Mahlangu was not being accused of lying. He was accused of suggesting that lying was improper. Advocate Selby Barker investigated the matter and made findings that confirmed that the conduct of the Honorable Premier of Mpumalanga was improper. The finding was that the conduct in question was in violation of Section 96 of the Constitution, requiring members of the Executive to uphold the highest level of ethics. Subsequent to that, Honorable Mahlangu resigned. Do we still react the same way when issues of impropriety are suggested? Or have our values shifted? My team and I have continued to do our work with the understanding that our values as a nation have not shifted. What we believed was wrong in 1999 is still the same as what we believe is wrong in 2013. We also have continued to operate with the understanding that our Constitution requires those who exercise state power and stewardship over state resources have to act in a proper way, and that our job as a public protector South Africa is to determine when somebody has acted improperly, to provide a report on our findings, and to take appropriate remedial action. Let us start with learning without books. Very briefly, my finding on that matter is that the Department of Education failed to provide adequate schoolwork books on time to the Eastern Cape schools in 2012 and 2013. If you read the report, you will find that the problems that existed included the fact that the books were transcribed in incorrect language. Some schools did not receive all of the books they were supposed to receive, and some did receive the workbooks, but they arrived very late. My team and I were called upon to establish if the Minister of Education was to blame for what happened. Having looked at the law, the prescripts, and guidelines that regulate the delivery of school workbooks, My finding is that the responsibility rested on the shoulders of the Director General, Department of Basic Education at National, and the Head of Department in the Eastern Cape Department of Education. And my finding is that both of them failed to coordinate their processes appropriately to ensure that school workbooks were delivered on time. In the report, I indicate findings of maladministration, which is bad administration, and also findings of prejudice. The key prejudice being the fact that learners had to learn without books, hence the title of the report. A related finding of prejudice is that as these learners had to learn without books, this placed them at a disadvantage compared with their counterparts in schools where books were supplied. So this not only violated their right to education in terms of Section 29 of the Constitution, it also violated their right to equality. With regard to remedial action, the report indicates that appropriate remedial action to be taken as envisaged in Section 182(1)(c) of the Constitution is the following. A. The Minister of Basic Education should hold the Director General, Mr. Bobby O'Brien, accountable for his actions and omissions that resulted in the failure to prevent, contain, and solve the national school workbooks crisis. B. The Director General of the National Department of Basic Education is to ensure a functional coordinating structure with the head of Department of Eastern Cape, keeping in mind the National Department of Basic Education's structure and plan, with dedicated officials at all levels, as the current processes seem to be incomplete and inadequate. The officials should have clearly defined responsibilities to ensure that district officers and school accounting officers are consulted with regard to the ordering and delivery of workbooks. C. Both the Director General of the National Department of Basic Education and the Head of Department of the Provincial Department of Education should refrain from using the statistics of learners enrolled in the previous academic year for the planning and delivery of the following year's school workbook requirements. Indeed, the Head of Department of the Provincial Department of Education should consult accounting officers concerning the planning and delivery of school workbooks for the following academic year's roles. A. Deliveries should occur during official school hours, and school accounting officers must be consulted prior to the delivery. F. The Head of Department of the Provincial Department of Education should ensure that the schools have adequate storage space for the safekeeping of school books. G. The Provincial Department of Education should ensure that schools have dedicated officials to take charge of delivered stock and proper document management of school workbooks. We are aware that the problem of school books in a broader sense has been mostly solved. However, I considered that this report is still relevant, despite the interaction we had with the Department of Education to sort out aspects that needed to be sorted whilst we were investigating. there are steps that still need to be taken, and they are the steps that I've just announced. The second report is called Unsolicited Donation. This report deals with allegations relating to the hosting of the ICT in Durban in 2012. The allegations were that the procurement process for the hosting of the Indaba was irregular. It was also alleged that Indaba funds were abused. And then thirdly, it was alleged that a person related to the then Minister of Communications was at the center of the mismanagement of those funds. My finding in that particular case are the following. The company that hosted the Indaba or coordinated the hosting of the Indaba, named Carol Bauer Productions, was not appointed by the Department of Communications to coordinate the Indaba. The Indaba was Carol Bauer Productions' project that could have been executed by them without the Department of Communications' consent. We acknowledge that CBP needed the Department of Communications' blessing for the communications industry support to be solicited. My finding in relation to the procurement, therefore, is that there was no unlawfulness or impropriety on the part of both the Department of Communications and Carol Bauer Productions. The second allegation being the solicitation of sponsorship for the ICT in Indaba. My finding is that the Department of Communications did solicit sponsorship for the ICT in Indaba, but this was not unlawful or improper. I also find that the Honorable Bully, being the minister at the time, was not the first to issue sponsorship letters of support on behalf of Carol Bauer Productions and the ICT in Durban. Previous sponsorship letters had been issued by the then Deputy Minister of Communications, the Honorable Obert Mabela. A related allegation regarding the solicitation of sponsorship support for the ICT in Durban was that Honorable Bully the Honorable Bully pressured Telkom and other mobile phone companies and affected mobile phone companies to sponsor the event. This allegation is not substantiated by evidence. The companies were interviewed and they claimed that they had not been subjected to any pressure. What was considered by the Department of Communications was that after sponsorship pledges had been received, and when it became clear that the money was not forthcoming, the companies were encouraged to deliver on their pledges. The fourth issue I dealt with was the donation, which speaks to the title of the report. My finding is that Honorable Pule did commit her department to donate, I put donation in quotation marks, 10 million as financial assistance to the ICT in Indaba, through her letter dated 15 December 2011, addressed to Ms. Carol Bauer. However, on the basis of evidence before me, the finding is that such financial assistance was unsolicited. The process was also not executed in accordance with Treasury Regulation 21, regulating the granting of gifts, donations, and sponsorships by the state. Her conduct and that of her department was accordingly unlawful, improper, and constitutes maladministration. Regarding Carol Bauer Productions and the 10 million donation, my finding is that Carol Bauer Productions innocently accepted the donation and integrated the money into the ICT Indaba coordination operations. It would accordingly be unjust to require that the money be refunded. It is also clear that the state derived some value from the event and related activities, although a lot of that value was later undermined by the negative publicity. The next issue I had to deal with was the allegation that Honorable Pule had a relationship with a certain Mr. Mgqobisa, which influenced his behavior in the Indaba. And it was also alleged that this Mr. Mgqobisa was represented to the Department of Communications as Honorable Pule's companion, and that he accordingly improperly benefited as such from departmental finances. My finding on this issue is that despite numerous denials at various fora, Honorable Pule did represent to her department that Mr. Mgqobisa was her official companion. The key evidence being a form completed upon her appointment as the Deputy Minister of Communications. I further find that by her own admission to me during her interview on 28 June 2013, Honorable Pule and Mr. Mgqobisa had a romantic relationship. She added during that interview that he was, however, not her spouse, as he was married to someone else under civil law and was therefore not entitled to spousal benefits. During the meeting, Honorable Pule offered to ensure that all departmental expenditure on Mr. Mgqobisa's trips would be reimbursed before I concluded my investigation. In this regard, Honorable Pule made good on her promise, as Mr. Mgqobisa paid back on 18 July 2013 an amount of 89,326 rand 35 cents that was inappropriately spent on him by the Department of Communications in September 2009 on a trip to Mexico, where he accompanied Honorable Pule on her official visit to that country. However, my finding is that Honorable Pule was not entirely honest to me, as she stated that the relationship ended before she became the Minister of Communications, while evidence relating to trips undertaken as Minister of Communications confirmed a relationship. I can also not reasonably accept her submission that she did not know that her office unilaterally reflected and funded Mrs. Mgqobisa as her spouse during her trips as Deputy Minister and later as Minister. Honorable Pule's conduct in this regard was unlawful. I also considered it improper that she tried to pass the buck onto her staff. I consider this on its own grossly improper and unethical. In the main report, I also deal with Honorable Pule's treatment of Parliament. Let me just now quickly go to the allegation that MTN's sponsorship of 15 million was irregularly diverted by Mr. Ngobisa to another company called ABR instead of the main account for the Indaba, which was handled by Carol Bauer Productions. And that he then transferred without authority 6 million of this money into his own company. Firstly, I must just indicate that what MTN does with its money is none of my business as the public protector, because it's a private company and the money never went into a government fund. And the question that was raised, and I was questioned by Mr. Ngobisa and the Department of Communications on, is why are we concerned about MTN's money? My concern, or the team's concern about this money, is that there is a relationship between the unsolicited donation of 10 million by the Department of Communications and the excess money from the 15 million that was donated by MTN and then was used as orphaned money, which was the concept that the team used. My finding on the MTN sponsorship of 15 million is that 15 million was irregularly diverted by Mr. Ngobisa into ABR banking account instead of the CBP account specifically designated for the ICT Indaba funds, and that he subsequently improperly transferred 6 million of this money into his Kemano company. I further find that the appropriation of 6 million, or a substantial part thereof, constitutes improper enrichment on the part of Mr. Ngobisa's company, and that siphoning this money was made possible through the surplus funds caused by the unsolicited and unlawful donation of 10 million from Honorable Pule. Regarding the allegation that Honorable Pule improperly benefited from a pair of Christian Louboutin shoes worth 10,000 rand from Mr. Ngobisa, owner of Kemano, which was subcontracted for and benefited from the ICT Indaba. My finding is that although Honorable Pule was wearing new red-soled Christian Louboutin shoes at the event, no concrete evidence linked the shoes to Mr. Ngobisa or Kemano. I accordingly find no justifiable reason to reject her explanation that she bought the shoes for herself and owns several shoes from this exclusive brand. On the allegation that Honorable Pule's alleged romantic relationship with Mr. Ngobisa created a potential conflict of interest which benefited him improperly from the financial sponsorships contributed by private companies towards the hosting of the ICT Indaba, my finding is that this allegation is substantiated. It was Honorable Pule's department that brought Mr. Ngobisa and his company to the ICT Indaba fold without Carol Bauer Productions' request, evidence indicates that Carol Bauer had already indicated to the Department of Communications that she already had an execution partner by the name of Hunter Life, an agency that was eventually elbowed out as Kemano and its car subcontractors took over the ICT Indaba coordination process. On the allegation that Honorable Pule caused her department to benefit Mr. Ngqubisa improperly in the ICT Indaba, I also find that this allegation is substantiated. Honorable Pule acted in breach of paragraph 2.3, subsection G of the Executive Ethics Code, in that her unlawful extension of spousal benefits to Mr. Ngqubisa amounted to making improper use of allowances available to her. I have found that Honorable Pule's conduct was inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution and the Executive Ethics Code. Specifically in the Constitution, we're talking about Section 96, and we're talking about the Code in terms of Section 3 of the Code and 4. The appropriate remedial action as envisaged in Section 182(1)(c) of the Constitution is the following. A. Honorable Pule. Honorable Pule is being asked to do the following. 1. To make good on her promise made on 28 June to quantify all amounts spent by the Department of Communications on Mr. Ngqubisa's overseas trip to Mexico and other trips, and ensure that every cent is paid back. Honorable Pule, the amount has already been refunded, as we have noted. However, the amount that was refunded was the one we had a receipt and we gave it to Honorable Pule, so it was quantified. So the process of quantifying what we hadn't quantified has not happened yet. So we are requesting that that process should be concluded as agreed with her on 28 June 2013. I'm also asking Honorable Pule to issue an apology to Ms. Carol Bauer for subjecting her to a hidden agenda, placing her in an untenable situation. The Sunday Times, for the persistent insult and denial of the truth that she eventually admitted to me on 28 June 2013. Affected staff members of the Department of Communications for placing them in an unethical situation involving persistent lies and deceit. And finally, Honorable Pule is being asked to apologize to Parliament for persistently misleading this august constitutional pillar and never admitting the truth right until the end. Just to clarify that, to us, Honorable Pule admitted the truth at the end of our interview on 28 June. To Parliament, our understanding is that she never admitted the full circumstances of what happened. I'm also asking Honorable Pule to consider doing what the Honorable Premier Ndaweni Mahlangu did, faced with circumstances that are far less than what Honorable Pule is being accused of doing. I'm further asking the President to take note of the findings and expedite the finalization of the review of the Executive Members Ethics Act and the Executive Ethics Code. The idea being that there are various gaps currently in both the Act and the Code, and that these should be eliminated as we have previously requested. I'm requesting the Speaker of the National Assembly to take note of the findings and remedial action directed to the President and Honourable Pule, and to ensure that Parliament takes this into account in its ordinary oversight work. I'm also asking the Honourable Speaker of the National Assembly to monitor that Honourable Pule makes good on her promise to repay state funds irregularly spent on Mr. Mqobisa. Obviously, we're taking account that 89,000 has already been paid. To the Minister of Communications, I'm requesting that he ensures that funds owed by Mr. Mqobisa are urgently calculated and reclaimed from him. I'm also asking the Minister of Communications to consider commissioning an audit with a view to verify all the trips abroad undertaken by Mr. Mqobisa at state expense while accompanying Honourable Pule, and recover from him all what the department would have improperly paid for him. I'm also requesting the expeditious execution of the disciplinary processes in respect of all employees that acted unlawfully in violation of the Public Service Code of Ethics in relation to the ICT industry. The conduct of these employees during this investigation should also be taken into account in that disciplinary process. I'm asking the Minister for Public Service and Administration to consider subjecting all members of the Cabinet and Provincial Executive to an ethics seminar, and to ensure that all new ministers attend an ethics seminar within 2 months of assuming office. We found that in the United States this is done. It's not assuming that ministers are unethical, it's just to familiarize everyone with the code, because everyone is subjected to a lot of information. Often the existence of the code becomes an issue when there is already a problem. So it's just supposed to be a preemptive approach. I'm also asking the Minister for Public Service and Administration to ensure that the Executive Ethics Code is turned into a pocket booklet to be provided to all members of the Executive on assumption of office, and also to be captured in the form of posters to be placed in all executive offices. That again is just to assist them to know what the code says well in advance. Lastly, I'm asking the law enforcement agencies already seized with the matter to proceed expeditiously on matters already referred to them by Parliament. From our side, we're not referring anything to any agency, given the fact that Parliament has already done so. I now quickly turned my attention to the last report titled Docked Vessels. As indicated earlier, the report communicates my findings and appropriate remedial action following an investigation into a complaint lodged on 19 February 2012 by the Democratic Alliance Member of Parliament by the name of Honourable Mr. P. van Dalen. Mr. van Dalen requested my office to investigate allegations relating to the improper award of an 800 million rand tender for the fisheries patrol services to a company called Segunjalo Marine Service Consulting. He further requested my office to investigate the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries alleged subsequent failure to re-advertise the tender, which meant that it was unable to fulfill its mandate to conduct scientific surveys, anti-poaching patrols, and inspections of fishing trawlers for illegal activities. He further alleged that the failure seriously jeopardizes the research and protection of the country's fishing resources and has far-reaching economic consequences. The complainant also requested a determination regarding the propriety of scoring, allocating one of the bidders the score of 1, which means very bad, on all the criteria, and the one with the least experience being scored the highest score of 5, which means excellent. This he attributed to a member of the bid evaluation committee, a certain Mr. Joseph Sibola. My office also received a substantially similar complaint from Mr. Paul McClons, the managing director of Smith Amandla Marine Pty Ltd. Smith Amandla Marine was the company that had been having this contract with the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries until this tender was advertised. And at the time the investigation started, Smith Amandla's contract had expired and the services were provided on a contract that was going on a month-to-month basis. Thank you. On 15 March 2012, I received a further complaint from Smith Amandla. The complaint was that the Honourable Minister Jomat Peterson had arbitrarily terminated its services at the end of the contract in retaliation to their whistleblowing on the contract that was about to be given to SMSC. Smith Amandla alleged that such arbitrary termination of the contract was going to affect the smooth transfer of operations from Smith Amandla to the new company. It also alleged that its staff were going to be adversely affected and the community at large was going to be affected. Smith Amandla then approached me, requesting me to ask the minister to reconsider her decision to cancel the contract abruptly and give them the 30 days notice that was in the original contract. I approached the minister about reconsidering her decision and allowing a smooth transfer of services over a period of 3 months. My request was not successful. As the investigation progressed, media reports regularly alleged that the patrol fleet was lying unattended to on account of the South African Navy's lack of competences and capacity to undertake the responsibility at the required magnitude. Later, there was an allegation that the vessels had been damaged by disuse. As the investigation drew towards a conclusion, the investigation team was approached by someone who called himself a whistleblower, who alleged that the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries had irregularly contracted with a company for the refurbishment of its vessels that had lost seaworthiness due to lying idle and lack of maintenance. As this came right at the end of the investigation, I decided to defer it to an offshoot investigation. Accordingly, I have made no determination in regard to this new allegation. On being approached on the original complaint, the department did not deny awarding the said tender irregularly to SMSC. The department, which I will call DAF, going forward, DAF went further to cancel the tender and committed itself to re-advertising the tender as soon as possible. As I indicated earlier, I approached Minister Jumat Peterson regarding the possibility of her reconsidering her decision to only allow a 1-month handover period for Smith Amandla to the Navy. I indicated to her that I had been told that this was impractical and that I was convinced that it was impractical. I then requested her to allow a 3-month period as requested. Minister Jumat Peterson refused. She indicated that everything was in place for a smooth handover and that she would provide me with a progress report. But such progress report was never provided. On analysis of all of these complaints, we arrived at 8 issues that needed to be considered and investigated. The 8 issues were the following. One was DAF's irregular award of the 800 million tender for the crewing, management and maintenance of the research and fisheries patrol services and act constituting improper conduct or maladministration. The second question was, did Mr. Joseph Sibola irregularly score SMSC 5 out of 5 on everything, despite SMSC not having the relevant experience? And while scoring Smith Amandla 1 out of 5 on everything, despite its 10 years of experience in conducting the exact service in question? If so, does the action constitute improper conduct and maladministration? 2 or 3, did the award of the patrol vessels tender to SMSC by DAF, in spite of the fact that Prima Fishing, a subsidiary of the Segunjalo Group, has fishing rights, accord SMSC the role of referee and player, and if so, did this create a conflict of interest for SMSC and accordingly an act of maladministration by DAF? 4, did the submission of 4 tenders on the same bid by entities linked to the Segunjalo Group constitute collusive tendering? If so, did DAF's entertainment of these bids constitute improper conduct and maladministration? 5, did DAF's failure to re-advertise the tender result in its inability to conduct scientific surveys, anti-poaching patrols, and inspections of fishing trawlers for illegal activities? And if so, does this constitute improper conduct and maladministration? 6, did DAF irregularly terminate Smith Amandla's services by ignoring a 3-month handover period and awarding the service to the South African Navy, which did not have the necessary competencies? And if so, did such action constitute improper conduct and maladministration? 7, was Minister Jumat Peterson's rejection of the request to defer her planned abrupt handover to the Navy an imprudent act which resulted in lack of proper patrols and deterioration of patrol vessels, resulting in millions of rand in refurbishment costs and rampant poaching? If so, does her action amount to fruitless and wasteful expenditure and accordingly improper conduct and maladministration? 8, did DAF irregularly contract a company that had been part of the SMSC group by the name of Nautic to refer its vessels that had become unseaworthy at at a cost exceeding 30 million, and if so, does such action constitute improper conduct and maladministration? Let me just start by saying I haven't investigated the allegation regarding Nautic and the 30 million contract, because that came right at the conclusion of the investigation. The team is looking into that as an offshoot investigation. Like all other investigations, the investigation started with looking at the legal and policy framework, correspondence, analysis of documents, interviews face-to-face, and telephonic interviews. The key people that were interviewed were DAF officials, Segunjalo representatives, Smith Amanda representatives, and representatives of the South African Maritime Services Authority, SAMSA. There were also informal discussions with industry role players, such as officials from SAMSA, the chairman of the Segunjalo Group, and other persons that understand this industry. A week before releasing the provisional report, I received a letter from the Minister of Agriculture, Minister Jumaat Petersen. This letter was attached to a letter from the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Minister Jeff Radebe, who was requesting me to assess a letter from Minister Jumaat Petersen and then advise him as the Minister of Justice. The essence of the request from the Minister of Agriculture, or Minister Jumaat Petersen, was that our investigation was unnecessary, despite having cooperated throughout the investigation and twice agreeing to defer the processing of the new tender. She was saying the investigation was unnecessary and that the Minister of Justice should consider stopping either this investigation or the investigation of the NPA, as it had appeared to her that the NPA was also considering these matters. The letter went on just around why it was unnecessary to investigate this matter, because the tender had long been recalled. Of course, I responded to the Minister of Justice to indicate that the request was improper, and that anyway, I was not aware of an investigation by the NPA, considering that the NPA, as I know it, does not investigate. Only the SIU has the power to investigate. During the provisional report stage, I informed Minister Jumaat Petersen that I consider her conduct as conduct constituting interference with an investigation, and that in my considered view, her conduct was at odds with Section 181(4) of the Constitution, which states that no person or organ of state may interfere with the functioning of these institutions, being the Public Protector and other Chapter 9 institutions. On the 800 million tender and all of the complaints and allegations we have investigated, I am making the following findings. Finding number 1, regarding DAF's irregular award of the 800 million tender for the crewing, management and maintenance of the research and fisheries patrol services, I make the following finding. A, DAF's immediate admission that the tender was irregularly awarded and proceeding to cancel it, and committing to advertise the process anew was proper. B, the award of the tender to SMSC was not in compliance with DAF's supply chain management requirements. and processes. This accordingly was improper. My final finding is that the acts and omissions of DAFF in relation to the award of the tender amount to maladministration. However, DAFF has already corrected that, so that's not a big issue. Finding number 2, regarding Mr. Joseph Sebula's alleged irregular scoring of SMSC, giving them 5 out of 5 on everything, despite them not having relevant experience, while scoring Smita Mandla 1 out of 5 on everything, despite 10 years experience. I make the following findings. A, the allegation that Mr. Sebula scored SMSC 5 out of 5 and Smith Amandla 1 out of 5 is substantiated. The allegation that the conduct of Mr. Sebula in scoring these 2 companies the way he did was irregular is substantiated. Mr. Sebula's conduct was in the circumstances irrational, subjective, and biased. It thus constitutes improper conduct and maladministration. The third finding is in regard to SMSC being said to be referee and player. My finding in regard to this allegation is that had SMSC been awarded the tender, it was indeed going to be placed in the position of referee and player, and this would have created a conflict of interest. The allegation in this regard is accordingly substantiated. If you go into the report, there's a whole long story around processes that are in place to minimize the conflict of interest, but those processes were never put in place to minimize conflict of interest. They were just put in place to minimize the ability of the crew to undermine the integrity of the process. So the findings accordingly that there would have been a referee and player situation, and this would have amounted to conflict of interest. So in the original award of the tender, DAFF had awarded this tender to SMSC regardless of the conflict of interest. This accordingly constitutes improper conduct and maladministration. The fourth issue was the submission of 4 tenders by 4 companies within the same group, the Segunjalo group, and the allegation being that this amounts to collusive tendering. I make 2 findings in this regard. The first one is that it is true that 4 companies belonging to the same group did submit tenders for the same bid. However, I have decided that this matter should go to the Competition Commission, which has expertise on collusive tendering. I must indicate that my own finding is that there was no collusive tendering. However, I have decided to still send it to the Competition Commission. The reason I found that there was no collusive tendering is because the Segunjalo group entities did not pretend not to be related. They openly indicated that they're coming from the same stable, and in their declarations they indicated that they were part of the consortium. Even as they attended meetings, briefing meetings there, some of the meetings were attended by the same parties, so there was no intention to mislead Why send it to the Competition Commission regardless? I'm sending it to the Competition Commission because, assuming only these 4 companies had bid for this tender, you would have a difficulty in deciding whether or not there was competition, because there would have been just 4 companies only that are all interrelated. So for the future, in government, often you are asked to get 3 quotations. So if you get 3 quotations from the same group of companies, it might be a problem. It is for this reason that we are seeking guidance from the Competition Commission. The 5th issue was the failure of the alleged failure by DAFF to re-advertise the tender. My finding there is that yes, DAFF didn't re-advertise the tender timelessly. However, this failure was not improper, it was justified because DAFF at the time was still finding out what went wrong. We, on the other hand, were also conducting an investigation, and it was proper that they wait for the conclusion of those processes. But I have blamed DAFF for the delay, though, because there were delays in cooperating with this investigation, which then extended the period of the investigation. The 6th issue is the termination of the Smith Amanda contract. The contract was properly terminated because it had already terminated. It was now going on a month-to-month basis. Therefore, legally speaking, there was no duty on DAFF to give Smith Amanda a 3 months notice on a 1-month contract. However, from a good administration point of view, because the Pulp Protector deals with good administration as the opposite of maladministration, my finding is that the minister's refusal to give them a 3-month handover period was maladministration or bad administration, because the 3-month handover period was not an issue of rights. It was an issue of good administration. It was supposed to allow for a smooth handover of the process, so as to ensure that services were not disrupted. And it's also been indicated to us by the industry players that the crew that was now to man the vessels needed to familiarize itself with the vessels before it could handle them on a regular basis. Because of the minister's failure to allow the 3-month handover process, I have concluded, or I have made a finding, that her conduct was improper and constitutes maladministration. The next issue I had to deal with was the minister's failure to reconsider her decision. The first finding relates to making that decision to start with. The 7th finding is about being now requested by myself to reconsider a decision and indicating to her that she needs to give them 3 months for a smooth handover to avoid service disruption, but also to be compassionate to the workers, and she refused. I have accordingly made the following finding. A, the minister's rejection of a request to defer her planned abrupt handover of the contract to the South African Navy, and which led to alleged lack of patrols and deteriorating of patrol vessels, was imprudent and led to fruitless and wasteful expenditure. B, the actions of the minister constitute improper conduct and maladministration. The 8th and last issue is the allegation that DAFF irregularly awarded a contract to repair the vessels that were now unseaworthy to a company at the cost exceeding 30 million. and that this award was irregular. I haven't made any findings on that matter because we have not investigated it. Regarding appropriate remedial action, I have made the following. I have given the department the following advice on how to take this process forward. Firstly, cognizance is to be taken of the fact that at the time of the commencement of the investigation, the department immediately revoked the contract, and the department should accordingly be commended for taking that action. They did so, of course, after legal action was taken by Smith Amanda. I'm requesting the President to consider taking disciplinary action against the Minister for her reckless dealing with state money and services resulting in fruitless and wasteful expenditure, loss of confidence in the fisheries industry in South Africa, and alleged decimation of fisheries resources in South Africa. It has also emerged that the lack of seamless handover of services affected the decisions around quota allocations, and therefore this whole process was delayed. The Director General in the National Treasury is being requested to ensure that the Chief Procurement Officer assists the Accounting Officer of DAFF by reviewing each stage of the new bidding process to ensure that there's compliance with all statutory and other regulatory requirements. I'm also requesting that the Minister of Finance is to help ensure that the tender that has already been advertised is finalized and the contract awarded within 60 days of the release of this report. Going forward, I'm requesting the Director General in DAFF to ensure that relevant legislation relating to supply chain management is complied with by the department. That includes the appointment of members of committees such as the bid evaluation committees and bid education committees. Also that the Director General should consider, if warranted, to take disciplinary action against Mr. Sebola. Again, I'm not saying he must, I'm saying he should consider, if warranted, the possibility of taking disciplinary action against Mr. Sebola for his conduct in the original tender, which has created the entire fiasco, leading to delays and lots of money being wasted. I'm requesting the Competition Commission to investigate the alleged collusive bidding. In conclusion, I must say that it is important that we be consistent when we deal with these findings. From what we did during the time of Mr. Ndaweni Mahlangu to what we are going to do today, it is important that we are guided by our consideration of the fact that those who are entrusted with public power and stewardship over state resources should know what is right and bring their actions to that knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Public Protector. It is now Q&A time. We will take a set of 3 questions at a time, and by show of hands, I will point out how the questions will be taken. One hand in front, there's another one behind you, then the third at the back. You will take them in that order.
Hi, Karen Moore from E-News. I know this is the story that haunts you wherever you go, but have you got any reaction to the Public Works Department now deciding that they're going to release their Nkandla report investigation. And the second question I have is with regards to the ICT and Daba. Given that you found that money was siphoned off in a very irregular fashion by this now boyfriend of the former minister, do you not feel that that amounts or justifies a criminal investigation? Because on the face of it, it appears to be fraud. Thank you.
Philip DeWitt from the Mail and Guardian. Fairly similar question. Sorry to bring things back to Nkandla, but as you may know, that cabinet statement came out just shortly before you began this sitting. Can you tell us whether there's any concern that the Nkandla report process is being re-politicized? Are you at all suspicious by the timing of this decision to release the interministerial report?
Hi, yes, Ed Cropley from Reuters. Your reference at the start to the 1999 case in which the official resigned, and then also to the ethics handbook for the pocketbook for ministers. Is this because you believe there's now a pervasive unethical culture at the highest level of government?
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. Perhaps basically recalling what we thought then as a basis of what we do now, because often we are attacked for deviating from what this office has stood for since its inception. The 1999 decision of the Public Protector is a good touchstone around what was regarded as the right thing to do in compliance with the Executive Ethics Code, and then communicating that we're still guided by that and expect whoever deals with our report to be also guided by that, whether they are interested or affected parties or they are ordinary members of the public. The question asked by Ms. Moore about DPW releasing its report, we welcome the release of that report. I can't think that it would do anything wrong. If anything, I think it actually does a good thing, in that it gives you a sense of what was the scope of that particular task team versus what was the scope of this investigation. Because for us, we investigate conduct in state affairs, and as I indicated yesterday and as I've done so throughout, is that we look at what happened, what should have happened, and whether or not there's a discrepancy. So if you look at that task team report, it would be important to look at, firstly, was the starting point the authority to act, which is our approach, is the authority to act. What was the authority to act? To whom was the authority given? And did whoever act, or was the person who acted the right person who acted to start it? And did they act within the scope of the authority? That's the first thing that we do. Then we look at the procurement process. If external service providers were brought in, we would look at, was the process as prescribed by law? I welcome therefore that decision to release that testament and commend the cabinet for doing so. On the question of the siphoning of funds being fraud, we didn't really go into that on this one. However, I do know that Parliament has made its own observations around that, and then it was referred to the law enforcement agencies. We stuck with the maladministration from our side, and what we deem to be a link between the excess funds from the MTN budget and the unsolicited donation from the government side. I wouldn't say fraud. I would, perhaps a concept you could use, but even then use it very loosely, is laundered money, in that it comes that way. When it comes out, it comes as MTN money, and then you wouldn't look at it as government money if you don't look very closely at what happened then. I've already